And while you are being seated, if you would, please turn to 1 Samuel chapter 24. If you are using the Bibles in the chairbacks, I believe it's on page 209. If you want to use the BWV, that version's always available. The BWV is the one we put on the wall, the big wall version, so in case you forgot. Let's see. All right, finally got a laugh. The first two services were like, there's too much rain going on right now, Chad. Let's see. And while you're turning to 1 Samuel chapter 24, I want you to think about the word vulnerability or vulnerable. Because I think, for the most part, no matter what we go through in life, we can be pretty vulnerable. And I think the most common place that we are all vulnerable is the bathroom. Oh, yeah. Why is that? Because for the most part, we don't want people to know that we're going to the bathroom. We'll turn the fan on, we'll, run to the other side of the house, and if we're, God forbid, in a place that is not familiar to us, what do? We scope the place out to make sure that it's safe and nobody's there, right? And the funny thing is, people aren't the only things that are picky. Animals do the same. My wife was getting mad at our dog Tinkerbell. Yes, my dog's name is Tinkerbell. Okay. I didn't name the poor thing. But she was getting mad at Tinkerbell because she was outside and sniffing what seemed to be every single blade of grass that God put on the planet before she would relieve herself. And Heather's just like, hurry up, And I'm laughing at Heather going, what's the difference between her sniffing every blade of grass and you passing 18, 19 bathrooms on the interstate because you know that Arby's in Defuniak Springs, Florida has a better and cleaner bathroom? Her response was, shut up. Rightfully so, I think. But now everybody here, I think, has a funny bathroom story, whether it's happened to you or perhaps, you got to witness it. Well, this past Sunday, it was my birthday, and I was whisked away to one of my favorite restaurants. And one of the unwritten rules in our family with birthdays is no matter whose birthday it is, you get to order whatever you want. And my son, Daniel, who is a radical little man in our family, we all love him, he said, sweet. And before we can do anything, normally we order for him. Okay, I'm going to get this, and Daniel will have, the waiter came up and said, what can we get you? And he went, kids pizza, pink lemonade, before we can say anything. And looking back, I don't think he was actually looking at what mozzarella, cheese, marinara sauce, and the acidity of pink lemonade would do to a 5-year-old's stomach. Flash forward 30 minutes later to what mozzarella cheese, marinara sauce, and pink lemonade did to a 5-year-old's stomach. He grabs Heather and says, let's go to the bathroom. Normally, he's a stickler at, I go to the boys' bathroom. I don't go to the girls' bathroom, and I'm a boy. Okay? But this time he grabbed Mom and went, let's go, like that. So here's what happens. They go into a crowded bathroom, and they finally get into a stall. And Daniel sits down and looks up at Mom and says, oh, my tummy hurts. This is going to take a while. And exactly that happened. People were laughing in the bathroom, but he didn't notice. And then you hear him go, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, boy, like that. And Heather, shh, stop it. People are starting to build up in laughter. And finally he goes, oh, there it goes. And just like that, the bathroom erupted in laughter. And that prompted him to go, are there people in here with us? So what's the point of that public potty parable? Well, tell you what, let's go to chapter 24 of 1 Samuel and read about what David and Saul were going through. Here we go. Verses 1 through 13. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, this is the day that the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. But then David crept up unnoticed and cut a corner off of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hands against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went his way. Well, then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord, the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. And he said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say, 'David is bent on harming you'? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, 'I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed.' See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off a corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand, and I recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hands will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hands will not touch you." Now, I think the funny thing that we need to realize right away is Saul was in the bathroom. Remember that part in the beginning where it says something about crags of the wild goats? I don't know what a crag is. Look it up later, not now. But he was at the crags of the wild goats along the way, and there was a cave, and he what? Went in to relieve himself. Now, I got to tell you this. He may be the king, but he's still a dude. If he was going number one, he would have used a tree. He went in to relieve himself. Basically, he grabbed a newspaper, looked at the men, and went, "My tummy hurts. This is going to take a while," okay? And he went far into the cave to make sure nobody knew what he was doing, right? Well, while Saul was reading the newspaper, David and his men snuck inside the cave. Or actually, no, I'm sorry, they were already in the cave. They were in the far back of the cave, and David's men said, "Look, God has delivered your enemy to you. Kill him. Take him out. God has done it. He said that he would do so. Do with it as you wish. Take him out." But David, instead, he reached down and he cut a piece of the robe. Now, see, David, he was so grief-stricken. He was so convicted, is basically what the Bible is saying. He was so convicted about taking a piece of his clothing. He rebuked his men and said, "Absolutely not. I will not touch God's appointed leader. I will not touch the man that God put in charge of us. I will not touch the anointed leader." So Saul, he gets done with his business. He walks out of the cave, and he and his 3,000 black ops dudes decide to go on down the road. But before they can get any further, David says, "My lord, the king." And they turn around, and there he is on the ground, face on the ground, humbling himself before a man who wants to kill him. Humbling himself before a man who wants to kill him. And these 3,000 men, and, David did so. But see, at this point, David was already anointed and appointed the next king of Israel. By all rights, he could have taken Saul out. But he chose not to. Instead, he respected Saul. In fact, he honored him by saying, "My lord, the king." And he honored him because of the position that God put Saul in. So how does that help us today? Honestly, I think one of the hardest lessons that we have to learn is point number one in our outline, is that we always have to have a respect for God's chosen leaders, even when they're against God. Well, how can you say he was against God? Well, easily. King Saul was against God. God anointed him, he appointed him, but he eventually started to do things on his own without God. In fact, the very thing that got him out of favor with God is when he was about to go to battle against somebody with his army, and instead of waiting for the prophet to offer up a sacrifice to the Lord, he got impatient and he just grabbed the torch and offered it up himself. And it was that moment that he lost favor in the sight of God. But see, for us today, respecting leaders in our lives, especially when we don't want to, we're probably thinking things like, well, he or she isn't a godly, he or she couldn't be God's chosen leader. He or she's not even a Christian. Or I can't respect anything that doesn't act godly. I like that one. That's a funny one. Or how about, I didn't vote for that person. They don't really represent me. Now, to you, those things may be true. But to the God of this universe, the creator of all things, the one who put everything into motion, those statements are false. Now, please indulge me on this because I think most of you can smell where I'm going with this. So before you get stark raving mad, please listen. God appointed and anointed Saul as king of Israel. Saul eventually did things his way without God. So did God fail? No, I don't think God failed. Of course not. He knew who Saul was before the foundations of the earth. He knew what Saul was going to say. He knew what he was going to do. So his behavior did not take God by surprise. It did, however, take the people by surprise. And there was division in the kingdom. It took the men by surprise. It took the leaders by surprise. It took all these people by surprise. And there was division in the kingdom. But see, the men with David, they were with David. They understood that God anointed him the next king. And that's why they were saying, there he is, take him out. We can have victory today. But see, David saw the big picture. He, like everybody, knew that Saul was anointed and appointed the king of Israel, right? But he remembered, unlike everyone else, that because it was God who put him there, it should be God who removes him. Because God doesn't put things in place without a purpose. But see, in David's heart, it was God who placed Saul there, meaning God should be the one who removes him. So let's go ahead and let's flash forward to today, 2015, United States of America. Everybody thinks that our country is falling apart because of decisions that have been made in the last few weeks. Well, I didn't vote for this president. I didn't vote for this Congress. Well, so what? God put them in place. See, as a nation, I believe everything that's been happening to this nation, we deserve. Now, as a follower of Christ, no, I don't think I deserve this. I'll be honest with you. As Christians, no, we shouldn't feel like we deserve this. But we are not judged as individuals when it comes to the nation and how he judges the nation. He judges the nation as a whole and what the authorities that we send do. So as a nation, I believe that we deserve everything and do deserve everything that's been happening around us. Why? Because Christians everywhere have become complacent and they've stopped. Well, how can I say this? Okay, I'll just say it this way. The United States has become the leading proponent and the leading advocate for the homosexual lifestyle. The United States is the leading and top producer of pornography worldwide. Fornication is running rampant in the church today, people. And you know what? 41% of all children born in the United States are born out of wedlock. We're failing the millennial generation. That's the generation after generation X, after generation Y. That's the millennials. The ones who are having babies now, 68% of all children born in the millennial generation are born out of wedlock. Let's go even further. 54.5 million babies never got to draw their first breath because we legalized abortion. Some may call that convenience. I call that child sacrifice. I don't think there's any way around it. So let me ask you this question. What's more of a pressing issue right now, the legalization of gay marriage or the fact that there's still fornication and adultery in the church? You're judging, Chad. No, I'm not. I haven't mentioned any names. I'm just feverishly trying to point out that instead of asking for forgiveness, we're pushing everything behind and we're saying, the church is saying, oh, it's okay. Sin is not okay. We know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. We know how we feel when we're doing something right, and we know how we feel when we're doing something wrong. And even when we go through with it, the Bible doesn't say that we can't sin, folks. That's not a surprise to God. It doesn't say we can't sin, but when we do, we have the opportunity, because of the love that God has for us, to submit ourselves to Him and say, God, I'm sorry. So what does this mean for those who have already passed that line of adultery or fornication or whatever litany of sins that follow behind you or myself? Well, to be honest with you, if you repent and ask for forgiveness, that is the point of healing. That is the beginning of healing in your life, the beginning of healing in your family, no matter what has happened. And you know what? At the end of your life, you're going to have scars. At the end of your life, you're going to have markings all over you that indicate that somebody close to you hurt you, or you hurt somebody close to you. But I got to tell you something. My Savior Jesus has scars. And He forgave us. And if that is not an indication to you that there is nothing that you can do or that you can do to God or anybody else that cannot be forgiven, I don't know what is. But all you have to do is ask for it. And for some people, that is the hardest thing to do. Because we all know how we feel when we're adamant against it. Don't fornicate. Don't sin. And then when you do it, you're like, well. But see, you can still get back over here in this, hey, you shouldn't. Here's why. I know for personal experience. And by the way, Father, forgive me. And healing begins. I've digressed a whole bunch, so let me allow this question. Why are we even surprised that the homosexual agenda has passed into federal law? Honestly, why are Christians surprised? Because that decision was an ungodly decision made by ungodly people. Just put it out there. It was an ungodly decision made by those walking an ungodly path. So why are godly people surprised? How can we as Christians expect leaders to work within the guise of godly decisions when those leaders themselves are ungodly people? That's like saying, I'm sick and tired of my Porsche acting the way it does. Why does my Porsche drive like that? It doesn't handle curves like it's supposed to. It doesn't go vroom like it's supposed to. Well, because it's a Prius. So, what's the solution? If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and ask for forgiveness, then I will hear them from heaven and I will heal their land. That's what God tells us. What does that mean? It means, Christians, if you would call out my name and seek my face, humble yourself, ask for forgiveness. And I will, then I will hear you. And I will heal your land. But see, instead, Christians everywhere are griping and moaning and complaining. The odd thing is Christians are complaining that our leaders are making ungodly decisions. Well, duh. We sent them there. Why in the world would someone who is not godly follow a godly path and humble themselves before a God they don't believe in the first place? That's backward thinking. We can't think like that. So basically, someone who does not see through the vision of God cannot see what sin is. Someone who doesn't walk a godly path cannot see the sin in their lives. They think they are right and Christians are wrong. So, this leads us into our next lesson. And our next lesson for Christians is that we have to know that it's God's plan. It's His timing, not my own. Now, see, this is something that many of us Christians forget all the time because, let's just face it, we get God's vision. We understand it. We know what he wants to do. So we, as people, want to make it happen now. And we encourage it to happen now. And sometimes we get ahead. But when we go past God and his vision, all we do is trip and mess things up. We can't go before God. Now, I'm not saying that God's plan is not going to happen if we don't do anything. You know what? I am saying that. God's plan will happen regardless of whether we do anything or not. The Bible says if no one praises his name, guess what? The rocks and trees will cry out. That means his plan will unfold from beginning to end, regardless of whether or not we lift a finger. Because he is God and we are not. That means his plan was thought of, created, and finished all before it started. Isn't that awesome? That's a pretty good trick if you think about it. But see, for David, he knew that. He knew God's timing, and he refused to listen to the advice of his men, and he refused to kill Saul because he knew it wasn't his place. You realize how easy it would have been for David to help God's plan along? He had him right there on the John, doing his business. All he had to do was kill him, and he would have been the king. He could have made it happen, but instead he didn't. Well, what kind of mess would he have been in if he did? He'd have to fight through 3,000 black ops dudes to get out of that cave in the first place. I mean, you can't kill a king on the toilet without it making a sound, right? See, he would have also had to deal with his entire kingship. Sitting on the throne of Israel, knowing full well that the reason he got on that throne was not because of the move of God, but because he killed his father-in-law. Can you imagine how we would know him now if that would have happened? Starting to sound like an episode of Dallas, like Who Shot JR, right? So for us, though, just because we're Christian does not give us the right to make God's plan happen. But because we are Christians, we are able to work within God's plan and within his timing. How many of you have ever been boogie boarding or surfboarding or just body surfing or something like that at the beach? What happens when you're in the water and you miss a wave? Basically, you just go up with the wave and you come down with the wave, right? So this massive, powerful movement just goes right through you. And you're left just in there waiting for the next movement. A lot of Christians, we do that. We miss the move of God, and what happens? We go up with the excitement, and we come down, and we're back to situation normal. But what happens if we go before the wave? We run the risk of getting hurt. Because as that wave is getting close to the shore, it's drawing more power and bringing up more water and more force that if we were to go before it, we can run the risk of getting sucked under or tossed and tumbled around and then slammed to the floor. All because we didn't wait. And many of us Christians, we do that. We get excited and we move before, and we get hurt or we hurt people. But what happens if you actually move at the right time? Man, it's smooth sailing all the way to shore. You accomplish what you set out to do. Why? Because you hit that force. You hit that powerful wave at the right time. And that's where we need to be as Christians, waiting for God's time to happen. And we move with his plan. Here's another example about God's perfect timing, and it happened in this church. I was speaking with a gentleman who's in the medical profession earlier this week, and they were in the operating room with somebody, and something happened during the surgery where their patient went into cardiac arrest. And they went through everything to try to get this person to come back, and for 30 minutes, how many of y'all have ever done chest compressions? Anybody in here do chest compressions? All right, we've got a few people in here. You know how tiring it can be, how fatiguing it can be. Imagine doing it for 30 minutes. And the whole time, you and the staff around you, you're just calling out to this person, stay with us, don't go. Come on, stay with us, stay with us, stay with us. This happened Wednesday. And he told me, he said, Chad, right before I knew the doctor was about to call, because once they call time of death, they have to stop, right? He said, right at the moment when I knew that doctor was about to call time of death, I just cleared everything in my heart and I said, God, please let this person live so that they may know their son. They may know your son. And within 10 seconds, there was a heartbeat, and that person's alive, recovering right now. That's a victory. But take that whole concept right there and wrap it up in the whole, if we try to do things by ourselves, we're not going to get anywhere. That person was dead for 30 minutes. But at a moment, he submitted himself to God. He cleared his heart and he said, God, that this person may know your Son, and boom. People, when you pray, coincidences happen, right? But when you don't pray, nothing happens, really. But see, we need to have faith in God's plan in the midst of the storms and even through persecution. We need to have faith in God's plan. How many believe that God has a plan? That's our third point, Karen, if you would put that up there. How many believe that God has a plan? How many believe it's hard to have faith in that plan because sometimes you have no clue what that plan is? Well, see, in the wake of recent events, I've seen Christians act horribly to Christians and to non-Christians just because they don't believe and they don't agree with certain things that have been decided. And both sides are calling each other names. Both sides are calling down hellfire, brimstone, and judgment on either side. And it's disgusting. It's making me sick, to be honest with you. Because Christians are not acting according to the way that God called us to act. And I want to encourage you right now, stop saying that God is going to judge America. Stop trying to bring your judgment down in the name of God is what I'm saying. Yeah, God is going to judge America, but you're included. Do you really want that to happen? And stop being the why, the where, and the when of it, people. God will judge people when he wants to. I can show you stories in the Bible where God let an entire group of people go 400 years before he brought judgment to them. So don't be screaming and crying just because we've been doing this for 2 weeks. He'll get to it when he gets to it. But see, this is what was going through the minds of the Israelites when King Saul was in the cave and his men were saying, kill him right now. He's got him. We got him. Go for him right now. There he is. David recognized that God put an evil king. David recognized that God put an evil ruler in charge of Israel. But David also recognized that King Saul was before him. God placed him there. God will take him out. There is no escaping the judgment of God. We will all go through it. But let me tell you, it's going to be according to his time because his ways are perfect. And if you remember at all the story of King Saul, it didn't work out for the dude who killed Saul. He paid with his life. So we don't need to be like David's men jumping at the gun. We don't need to be like them where they were up in arms ready to kill and to run over everything in the name of God, but we need to have our arms up in prayer. So when you guys are watching CNN and Fox this week, instead of going, can't they see? No, they can't see. Let me answer that for you right now. They cannot see. Do not expect ungodly people to see through the eyes of God. But that is your opportunity to go, I know how to pray. Lord, that you would surround our leaders with godly people so that they may witness your Son to them. How awesome is that? I mean, if you can't do that, then turn Fox and CNN off, people. Come on. But I want you to chew on this for a while. If you believe that God has a plan, and you believe that God's plan is going to go from beginning to end without a problem, then you have to know that when the book of Revelation, all that stuff happens, in order for the book of Revelation and all the things in there to happen, in order for the end to come, guess what? Bad things have to happen. Bad decisions have to happen. Things that don't go well with followers of Christ have to happen. Right? Well, if that has to happen, then you have to think that God, in his sovereignness, in his ability to create and do all these things, if Revelation says that Israel has to stand by herself, Don't you think God will put leaders in the countries that surround Israel to make it so that nobody stands with Israel? Don't you think God, in his infinite wisdom, would be able to put the people in power that he wants to be put in power to humble a nation of Christians who won't pray? And I'm not talking here, I'm talking worldwide now. But to also make it to where Israel does have to stand up alone. You don't think he's capable of doing that? See, this means that in these times, we the Christians may have to endure some storms, and we may have to endure some persecutions, and that's okay. Because Christians everywhere have done that. If you think what we're going through right now is persecution, you are sadly mistaken. There are Christians all over the world right now fighting for their lives. People, there's a shaking going on in our church. There's a shaking going on in the church worldwide. There's a shaking going on in the country, in this world, all over the place. And do you know why there's a shaking? It's not the enemy rattling our tree. It is God shaking us because it is God's mercy that is trying to wake us up.